The Compromise of 1850 by Elijah Ledger. The topic was the Compromise of 1850. One big person involved in the Compromise of 1850 was Henry Clay. When Henry Clay feared for the future of the Union, he went to Daniel Webster for help. For 4 years, Congress bitterly debated the expansion of slavery. So David Wilmot proposed the idea that all slavery in the territories acquired from Mexico be prohibited. Now, people that disagreed with slavery said that Congress had the ability to balance all slavery in the U.S. Congress tried to come up with a successful compromise to stop slavery in the U.S. So what they came up with was that slavery be prohibited north of 3036 latitude and continued south, which means that's about half the U.S. So slavery can go on down here, but there is no slavery north of 3036 latitude. Lewis Cass of Michigan and Stephen Douglas of Illinois was known as popular sovereignty. It declared that the people actually living in a territory should decide whether or not to allow slavery, which means, say someone, that's a state, and that's its neighboring state. Say a person the people living here say no slavery, but the people right next to it say slavery. Then there is no slavery over here, and there is slavery over here, which made the Congress's agreement look bad because this agreement right here, Lewis and Douglas, or the Lewis Cass and Stephen Douglas, made something where you could choose in your own state whether or not to have slavery. So the previous agreement meant that people in the northern, if they wanted slavery, they had to move south. And people in the south, if they didn't want slavery, had to move north. But this allowed people to have slavery wherever they lived. So the population of the U.S., or the people living in the U.S., liked this more than Congress's previous agreement. But neither of the Cass and Douglas or Congress's previous agreement satisfied the U.S. as a whole. So it was up to Henry Clay, who came back to Congress after a 7-year absence, to solve the North and South disagreement over slavery. For an hour, Clay designed a complex plan to save the Union to Daniel Webster. Henry Clay proposed that a compromise could only be made if it satisfied the North and South. After an hour of outlining a complex plan to Daniel Webster, they came up with an agreement that'll satisfy both North and South. California be admitted as a free state, which means there's no slavery. There will be no restrictions on slavery in New Mexico and Utah, so they can have slavery if they want, or no slavery if they don't. Texas relinquished its claim to land in New Mexico in exchange for federal assumption of Texas' unpaid debts, which means that Texas will not buy land in exchange for the federal government taking its debts. At the same time, banking and business interests as well as speculators in Texas lobbied and even bribed congressmen to support the compromise. Even with these manipulations, only 4 senators and 28 representatives voted. Later, Congress came to an agreement where North and South would both be happy. Later, when they did agree, they came up with admit California as a free state. They kept that, where California doesn't have any slavery. They allowed the territorial legislators of New Mexico and Utah to settle the question of slavery in those areas, which means the legislators can say, yes, we want slavery, or no, we don't. Set up stringent federal laws for return of runaway slaves. So if a slave runs away, they return it to the owner. Abolish slave trade in the District of Columbia, which nowadays is Washington, D.C. They gave Texas a $10 million to abandon its claims in the territory of New Mexico, east of the Rio Grande. So they gave back land to New Mexico, as well as they stopped claiming land in New Mexico, and they got $10 million to pay off their debts to the federal government.